In September, the decomposed remains of Celeste Rivas Hernandez were found in the trunk of singer David's Tesla. A private investigator is now claiming he has new evidence, including the identity of the last person to park the Tesla. Dave, what do we know about this one?
Well, this is big news because it involves this rap singer, R&B singer who I've never heard of before, David. I've never spelled my name like that, but I'll go with it. And apparently, the allegation is that the body was in the car perhaps months before it was discovered, and it was subject to perhaps some satanic ritual, that there's a allegation that they were going to somehow mutilate the body or do something. It gets weirder and it's awful. And you have David, who has lawyered up and has canceled his tour and has transferred his assets apparently to his mother. So that shows you that he's expecting something to come down. But still, there's no additional evidence against him that we've learned, other than just these weird, gory details of a dead body in a trunk of a Tesla that he owns for perhaps a long, long time, to be subject to some weird ritual. So it gets weirder and more disgusting. But yet, from an evidentiary standpoint, I don't yet see any smoking gun against him.
Let's play SOT 2, and I want to get your reaction to this, Dave.
We'll say this: there are some things that, and I'm talking physical evidence that was at that house that is, there could have been greater plans as far as getting rid of her, and it's scary, sadistic stuff, and that's why we're trying to learn more about that. I wish I could say more, but for obvious reasons I can't. But it doesn't have to do with how she died, but maybe how they were planning on ultimately getting rid of her, and how maybe that Tesla was just a holding spot at the time, and things just, their timing was just off as far as getting this done. But there's a few things that were just like, will blow your mind.
So, Dave, I know you've dealt with many high-profile cases. Don't you love it when you got a private investigator snooping around and giving interviews? And I say that obviously sarcastically for the viewers. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, he was very vague about it. It's like, what does he mean by scary, sadistic stuff? I mean, it's tantalizing and weird, but is that something that matters to prosecutors? I mean, it is a crime to mutilate a dead body, but we want to know who did it, who's the one who killed this poor victim, not necessarily who's trying to engage in some sadistic stuff after the fact, unless that person is the killer. That's what I want to know. And so, they're raising a lot of questions about, potential accomplices. That's interesting, because if there are accomplices here, they could be charged as a principal in this murder. So, it's like they're teasing us with this stuff and going on podcasts without giving out names and details. That doesn't seem to be fair. Although I do love Jesse Weber's podcast, and I know he watches this, so it's nice to give him a plug.
Yeah, and Jesse Weber, guys, for those of you who haven't watched him, he's among the very best, and he's a really, really good guy too. So
Definitely.
good for Jesse for getting that guy to talk. Some of the additional details he shared in that interview that we don't have a SOT for was that doesn't appear there was any evidence that she was murdered in David's house. Again, this is all totally uncorroborated, and as Dave said correctly, very vague. But when it comes to accomplices, here's an interesting legal angle, and I'm really glad you're here with us, Dave. When you have a principal to a crime, so what that means is a principal is somebody that is involved in a killing before the killing happens. If you have an accessory, which is different than a principal, accessory after the fact is a crime in the state of California, as it is in Florida. And I learned from my friend Dave here that in Florida, that can carry a sentence of up to 30 years just being an accessory after the fact to murder. In California, an accessory after the fact for murder is 36 months, and you serve it at 50% good time work time, which means the max you spend in California, if you're an accessory after the fact murder, is 18 months. It's the max we can get. In every other state, except for my crazy state of California, it's based on the crime. So if you steal a bike, you're an accessory after the fact, and typically it's like half of the crime. You're subject to half the penalty for stealing a bike. If you rob a bank, it's half the penalty for robbing a bank. In Florida, 30 years is quite a hit. Somebody's determined that's half of a life sentence, I guess. California, it is, if somebody's in custody, and a lot of times, as Dave knows, In homicide cases, you can prove somebody is up to their eyeballs in a murder after the fact, even though you know they were involved before, but you can only ding them up to 18 months. And by the time a case comes to trial anywhere in Southern California, they've already got what's known as CTS, or credit time served, and they are out. So you can probably tell based on my rant with my friend Mark Garagos this morning, I would much rather California laws reflected Florida's as far as accessory after the fact. And as far as David goes, apparently one of the things this investigator said is they do have video, which is one of the questions that Dave and I have been talking about in previous episodes. Like, did that Tesla capture the identity with all the cameras on Teslas of the person who parked the car there? And according to this guy, the answer is yes, that one of those cameras picked up the driver. We don't know who that is yet, but when whoever drove that car and parked it there with this poor young woman's body, and I shouldn't even say a young woman, she's a girl. She wasn't even 15 yet. So this poor girl's body in the trunk, that person in Florida would be on the hook for 30 years, which, as far as solving this, assuming it's not David driving the car, that's a heck of an incentive for somebody to cooperate with law enforcement. In California, that person's going to sit down with their lawyer and they're going to go, hey, man, max you can do is 18 months in custody. So maybe you don't want to rat out your buddy who killed her. And it's going to be interesting to see. It's a wasted opportunity as a tool for law enforcement to get people involved in conspiracies to kill to cooperate. So, Dave, have you had a case like that where an investigator has been running around giving interviews? Have you done one of those in your office, or have you had that happen to you before?
Well, remember the Dalia DiPolito case, the case of the stripper who married a guy she just met at the strip club or from an escort service. That's it. And we had a prosecutor 3 times because there were some issues with the jury. One was a hung jury, another one was overturned on appeal. Right. But when it came to prosecuting them or her, we eventually got her a lengthy prison sentence. But as far as an accessory after the fact, that charge in itself would be more on a Gabby Petito case, the Gabby Petito situation. Remember that one in where Brian Laundrie's parents supposedly were involved or weren't involved, and they were never charged with that. So that's on that. But as far as the DiPolito case, the issue we had was that you had law enforcement participating with Cops, the TV show, and they were there on the scene, and that was used by the defense as saying, you see, this was all a setup for a reality show. She thought she was on a reality show. So the cameras, the speaking out, the investigators that are out there in the public can do damage to a case. It never benefits the prosecution to have people speaking out while an investigation is pending. And so we experienced that with the DiPolito case, and with the accessory after the fact, we had Brian Laundrie, whose parents were not charged, because it's more than just knowing that your son committed a crime, allegedly. It's also actively doing something to cover it up, to prevent him from being caught. And his parents have still not been charged to this day. So although the penalty is steep for accessory after the fact, you still have to have the goods. It's more than just knowing something happened. It has to be active involvement.